Good evening. I'm sorry I couldn't be with you guys live this evening, but while normally our Thursday night classes are on the SNL genre, tonight it's more of the Tonight Show, recorded live this afternoon and viewed later that same evening. A good Erev Shabbos, ParshaNoach. It was brutally hot during the day. The little breeze that there was brought with it sand and dust, forcing one to shield one's face from the potential momentary relief from that intense heat. And the nights were no better. Frigid temperatures, strong howling winds. Sleep only came due to pure, unadulterated exhaustion. No running water, no kitchens, no cooked food, no showers, no internet. Sometimes they would go days, weeks at a time with nothing to do. And then, without warning, there would be an intense firefight with the Taliban. And this fight itself, these fights, could last for days or weeks. And then, back to the same dull nothingness. This was the life of a serviceman in the 173rd Airborne Brigade during the residency at a remote outpost called Restrepo, tucked deep in the Karengal Valley in eastern Afghanistan. Other than the treacherous patrols that they were assigned to on rotation, the only times these young men, these young soldiers left that outpost was to take a monthly trek back to the larger base, where they would peel off their clothes for the first time in over 30 days, burn them, and then proceed to get ready to go back out to the outposts for the next tenure there. This was the life of an American soldier. Boredom, anxiety, trauma, danger, and dirt. For 12 months, the award-winning war journalist Sebastian Junger lived amongst these soldiers and documented their deployment, their day-to-day living, and eventual return home. And almost unanimously, these soldiers, upon returning stateside, were tired, worn out, exhausted, and more than half of them, within a short while, developed some form of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And one evening after returning home, Junger went to a dinner party with some of the soldiers and other journalists. About midway through the party, one of the other journalists turned to one of the soldiers, a man by the name of Brendan O'Born. And this man, Brendan, happened to have been suffering from severe case of PTSD. He was a team leader in Afghanistan and had been almost killed on countless occasions. So this journalist, she turns to Brendan and asked him rather innocently, was there perhaps anything at all about war that he missed? Is there anything he missed from that experience? Silence. The question seemed to transport Brendan to another country, another continent, another time, another reality. The journalist began to feel bad for even asking the question. He could see the suffering on Brendan's face as he seemed to be reliving all those years of horror and pain. And then slowly, the expression on Brendan's face began to change. The grimace on his lips faded, along with the intensely furrowed eyebrows as well. And as he did so, he lifted his head up and turned to the journalist and said, "Ma'am, I miss almost all of it. I miss almost all of it. Noach is a difficult character. On the one hand, you open by calling him a righteous man, a tzaddik. He is given a unique command by God to build the ark to save himself and his family. And after spending decades building this enormous ship, Noach boards the teva, and while on it follows God's commands to the T. Your sole purpose, Noach, is to preserve humanity and the animals on board your ship. Keep everyone alive and well. No marital relations, no time for relaxation. As a matter of fact, one of the midrashim remark in a hyperbolic fashion that Noach and his sons were so busy feeding and caring for the animals that they didn't sleep the entire time they were on the teva. And then finally, after living on the ark for more than a year, Noach leaves the ship. And this first thing he does upon leaving the teva is he brings a korban, a sacrifice to God in gratitude for survival. And this sacrifice, this korban, leads God to pledge to humanity to never again destroy the world. Noach, this unique individual, is almost single-handedly responsible for the preservation and continuation of not only the human species, but of all of creation. And yet somehow, from that lofty high, he has a rapid descent to a deep, dark place. He seems to completely lose himself. In the verses following his bringing of that sacrifice of the korban, he proceeds to plant a vineyard for the sole purpose of making alcohol. He then proceeds to overdrink so much and get so intoxicated that he undresses himself, he exposes himself, becomes unconscious in a drunken stupor. The same man, the man who listened to God in defiance to the world, the same man who was loyal to God's word in the face of family, friends, neighbors, and community, who mocked and scoffed at him, the same man who spent over 100 years building the teva, the ark, all while everyone around him ridiculed him and laughed at his fanatical idea that an apocalyptic flood was coming. His entire life, he was a man on a mission. He pushed on and followed God's every command. He was ready to go down in history as one of the most righteous heroes of all time. The man who survived the apocalypse. And all of that, his legacy, his honor, his glory, crashed and burned. The man who started all the Parsha as an Ish Tzaddik, righteous, ends up as an Ish Ha'adamah, a debased individual, passed out, drunk and unclothed in humiliation. A lack of control, no direction. What happened? How did a man who spent his entire life in service of God, a man who rescued humanity, how did he fall so far, so fast? As counterintuitive as it might sound, it is not uncommon for soldiers, upon returning home from war, to miss it. They miss the war. And why is that? And no, it's not because they're violent by nature, or they miss the horror, they're sadistic. Not all these are normal people. But during their years in service, these young men, these soldiers live with a deep sense of mission and purpose. Sebastian Junger, our journalist, observed that the soldiers form an intense brotherhood where they are ready at any moment to sacrifice their lives for their brothers and they know that their fellow soldiers will do the same as well. They're ready to literally jump in front of a bullet to save a comrade in battle. They live in a reality where they feel and believe that the fate of their country, of their family, friends, communities, and hometowns rests on their shoulders, on their ability to perform and do their job well. They live with a mission, and they have a deep sense that they are needed, that their lives matter. And so, for some of the soldiers, the PTSD is not a result of the trauma of the conflict. Rather, it comes from the trauma of the extraordinarily difficult task of reintegrating into modern civilian society. Because now the struggles don't seem to carry the same import, and the decisions are much less dramatic. We're finding meaning and profound purpose in everyday existence seems elusive and unattainable. It's mundane. It's insignificant. There's no mission, no sense of greater purpose. Sebastian Junger, in a rather depressing yet sharp observation, remarked that modern society has perfected the art of making people feel not necessary. And when life feels meaningless, when it is without purpose or direction, it is very easy to not only get lost, but to lose oneself. For the last significant portion of Noach's life, over 120 years according to Rashi's calculation, Noach was on a singular mission. He was building an ark, a sanctuary that's going to be the vehicle for the preservation of the world. Noach was literally preparing to save the entirety, to save the universe. And then, on the ark itself, there was no cruise. Constant strain and stress and exhaustion. For an entire year, Noach did not sleep. He barely ate. He was running, feeding, caring, nursing the future of the world. But for all that pain, it was incredibly meaningful. There was clear purpose. For the last 100 years, Noach lived with a sense of purpose, with a mission, an understanding that the future of the world rested on his shoulders. The perpetuation of humankind and the animal kingdom rests on his ability to do his job. Like a soldier in battle, so too was Noach in his reality. And then, when Noach returned home, yes, he had that initial high and excitement of being home, that euphoric relief to be off the ark. It was only too soon that the feeling faded. And in its place, there was a gaping void. When he stepped foot off the wooden doorway of the ark, he went from being the most important man on the planet to just another guy. As a matter of fact, at this point in his life, he was far from the most important person around. His kids, his future grandchildren, they were now important. They held the key to the continuation of the human species. He was just some old guy. He went from being a man who lived with a sense of mission, whose every action counted, who lived in an existence that one slip up could mean the end of an entire species. And now, his everyday life, his actions or inactions, seemed to affect no one. What he said or did didn't seem to matter. And it was this realization that Noach could not cope with. And perhaps this is why Noach turned to an artificial stimulant, to an abuse of alcohol, because he couldn't cope with the loss of purpose without having his major mission. The failure of Noach is something that we face in our own lives, both in our lives as a whole and our calendrical experience on a yearly basis as well. This past week, we turned the calendar and began both the months of Cheshvan and October. And what both these months have in common is that they are bereft of any holidays. There are no Jewish holidays on the calendar in Cheshvan and no legal holidays in October. Halloween is neither Jewish nor a legal holiday. There's no shofar, no ne'ilah, no sukkah, no yisker, no matzah, no vacations, no big family get-togethers. It's just day to day, week to week, normal, ordinary life. It's an entire month of a plain white calendar. No boxes are highlighted for us in a different color. Nothing's filled in. It's open. It's clean. It's blank. It's ordinary. We are past the hustle and bustle of the holiday season, and now things slow down. And what is true in regards to the calendar can be the same at certain junctures in our lives. When our kids, or perhaps even our grandchildren, grow up, when we are no longer running around like a chicken without a head, when life slows down, life can appear very ordinary. But what Noach failed to realize is that it is during this time of the year, during these years of our lives more than any other, that we can find and infuse meaning in the ordinary, in the routine. It is now that we make the extra effort to commit and connect with our weekly learning, our daily davening, attending regular Shabbos services. It is now that we realize that life is so much more than just running from one distraction to the next. It is now that we realize that we can make a positive impact on our families and communities in countless ways, be with our time, energy, participation, and resources. And it is now that we realize, no matter how young or old I am, my relationships with my loved ones, with family and friends, and most of all with God, is deeply meaningful and deeply matters. This is the Noach challenge of the 21st century. And this is the challenge that Judaism calls upon us to answer with commitment, devotion, and ideally, a smile too. Good Shabbos.